Welcome to everyone. I am Sharon Constanson, Chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, and I welcome everybody to today's function. Our guests, Nigel Casey and Jordan-Kirwan, have been fantastic draws in terms of numbers of people they've drawn to this event. So it really is fantastic to see so many of you from various parts of the world that have come to join us today. So thanks again, and looking forward to our event. Format of today will be 10 minutes where Nigel will talk about setting the scene in terms of the current circumstances for Brexit and the way it is looking for South Africa. That will be followed by Sean giving us the same 10 minutes as well. And we'll have some questions from the chamber, and then we'll open the questions to the floor. Can I please ask everyone to go into the Q&A function and utilize that to pose their questions. We will then, as the chamber, pull those questions together for you and make sure that all the questions, as many varied questions as we possibly can, are covered in the question and answer session, which is quite a long period of time we're giving you, about 25 minutes. We will finish on time on the hour, in an hour's time. So I thank you very much. I would like, first of all, now to introduce our two guests. Nigel Casey, who is the High Commissioner to South Africa from the UK. He has a 30-year career diplomat and is now on his second stint into South Africa, previously in the 90s, the British Consulate General, now the High Commissioner. Previously the Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Ministers Cameron and Prime Ministers May, and before he served for the government in the US, Russia, India, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Sean Jordan-Kirwan. Sean joined the trade team in South Africa a year ago and has 10 years experience with the government, focusing on international trade, sustainable economic development, design and evaluation of UK aid-funded private sector development programs. Sean transferred to the DIT's Emerging Market Emerging Market Strategy team. Goodness, Sean, you didn't have to give me a mouthful as big as that one to say. So I'm going to start first of all with Nigel, who's going to set the scene. Nigel, will you please then introduce Sean, and I'll pick up afterwards with Sean in about 20 minutes time. So welcome to both of you, and thank you very, very much. Sean actually is in the UK with us today, Cape Town, and Nigel is speaking to us from Cape Town. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to start talking in the hope that you can all hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation to address you this morning, and it's great to see so many people on the event, so thank you for your time. When we agreed with Sharon to do this event, we were thinking mostly about our EU exit and the implications for South Africa, but obviously since then coronavirus has crashed into all of our lives and come to dominate and has changed the context in important ways for this discussion and our work. And so I thought it would be wrong not to spend a bit of time talking about that as well as the implications of EU exit. I will try and be brief so that we leave most of the time for questions, but I will try and cover that because I think it's important as well, including some quite current issues which I imagine will be on your minds around international travel. So just to recap very briefly, as you know, we left the EU in January, but during the transition period, the EU continues to treat the UK as a member of both the single market and the EU customs union, and that extends to its relationships with third countries and third-party trade partners like SACU and Mozambique in this case. So we, as you will remember, spent a lot of time negotiating a replica of the EU SACU agreement to ensure continuity in our trade after we left the EU, and we did that successfully ahead of the original deadlines for the UK leaving the EU, and so we were well ahead of the curve, and that remains the case. There are a couple of parliamentary bits of parliamentary procedure that need to be finalised at the UK end now that we are leaving the transition period. In parallel with the similar processes that are in train in respect of the many other third-party agreements around the world, which we are also replicating. and that'll be done between now and the end of the year. And in parallel, South Africa and the other members of the SACUM agreement are finalising their own domestic ratification processes so that we can all hopefully collectively deposit our instruments of ratification for that agreement in good time this side of Christmas, so that there's no interruption and we don't need any transitional arrangement. So that is good news for exporters. We have in both directions. We've secured the continuity that we said we would seek, and so in respect to the experience for South African and British exporters of what January will feel like and thereafter, that you should not feel any significant difference. We've secured continuity, and that's been our key objective. We have only aimed for continuity in this initial phase because that is all that we were legally allowed to do whilst we remained a member of the European Union. As you will have seen, we're now in a different phase where the UK has begun negotiating new trading arrangements, not just with the EU, but with some other partners around the world. We have just finished the first such big bilateral negotiation with Japan, and when you see the details of that agreement, I think you'll see that it differs in some while it was built on the EU-Japan agreement, it differs in some significant ways, and that underlines our ambition to use our trade policy now that we have control back of our trade policy after 40 years of EU membership, that we can use that in creative ways to expand our economic relationships with partners around the world. We're simultaneously in talks with the US, with Australia and New Zealand. Those would have been the first round of these FTA negotiations, and so our ambition is clear, and more broadly, our ambition to be an important force in international trade is clear from our recommitment to that agenda, despite the international challenges at the moment. You'll all be aware, I think, that Liam Fox, our former Secretary of State for International Trade, is a candidate to lead the WTO and has made it into the final five. As you probably also know, there are two very strong African candidates from Nigeria and Kenya also in the running. So we'll see who comes out on top of that competition to be DG. But the broader signal remains that the UK is firmly committed to being a force to promote international trade and to try and roll back existing boundaries and remove barriers wherever possible, notwithstanding a difficult context, specifically in the WTO. We have also been working in the interim to support South African exporters as well as UK exporters to South Africa during the coronavirus crisis. I just mentioned this specifically because it has been part of Sean's work, which you may want to say more about in a minute. But one of the positives from the coronavirus crisis is that we've managed to sustain UK-South Africa goods trade without interruption, and that is because we have, despite the interruption in passenger traffic, we've managed to sustain goods traffic both by sea and by air between our countries, and that's, in fact, it's actually increased. If you've been following the trends in citrus exports from South Africa over the last 6 months, there's been quite a significant increase. Probably driven for two reasons. I think one is probably increased consumption of, as everyone's been chowing down vitamins to boost their immune systems over recent months, but also the disruption in supply chains elsewhere in the world has been an opportunity for South African agricultural exporters. I was told this week that half of the world's apples come from China, and I think that gives you with the disruption that we've seen and the realization of the dependencies that we and other European importers have on specific countries, not just for agricultural produce, but for other things like PPE and pharmaceuticals. There are some quite interesting opportunities to build new supply chains, or for South Africa to become part of new supply chains as the UK and other countries seek to diversify their supplies of key imports and reduce dependence on one or two sources as at present. So we having secured continuity, the agreement comes into force from the beginning of next year, and it has something called a built-in agenda, which is basically an inbuilt mechanism for consulting about ways in which the partners to the treaty might like to improve it in the future. It's called built-in agenda, and that will at some point that will look like groups of officials from South Africa's DTI and our DIT getting together and starting to look at the areas of agreement which either side would like to start building on. And we look forward to that in future. And I think this is an area where, as we've discussed with the British Chamber here in South Africa a number of times over recent years, we would really value your engagement, because it is only really the kind of lived experience of UK and South African exporters, which both of goods and services, which will really help us identify the areas in which we look to build on the existing accesses. It's happily one of the features of the UK-South Africa relationship that on services, the barriers to trade are low, and that's great, and that has meant that the number of issues that have cropped up over the time I've been here, the last 3 years, on services has been small, but I'm convinced there is potential for more. In the past, some of the areas which the members of the British Chamber here have highlighted have included intellectual property protections and also wider investment protection, and those are areas that we might be interested in exploring, but there will be others as well. And as I say, we really only it only really comes to life when this is informed by your actual day-to-day experience of where barriers to trade in goods or services remain. And so we look to you to have that two-way dialogue. Let me say a quick word about a couple of other things that have been happening before coronavirus. So we in the British Civil Service have also been through some quite significant reorganisation over the British summer. So as you know, the Foreign Office and Department for International Development, DFID, have merged to create a new organisation called the FCDO, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Dominic Raab is still the Secretary of State, and we have a new permanent secretary, Philip Barton. But what it has done is to put a real premium on really looking for areas where we can achieve extra bang for our buck by bringing greater coherence and cohesion to our international development policies and the rest of our foreign policies. So I think there's some opportunities there, and more broadly, our Prime Minister has made clear his ambition that he wants to see greater coherence across the board in our international engagement, with heads of mission like me being accountable for all areas of government activity overseas, which is something I welcome, and it will help us drive integration at this end in our work in South Africa. Now, one area which is important for all of you and which we've already been working on is the coherence of our offer, particularly our international finance offer, which is something we tried to articulate in a way which helps you understand how better to access UK finance offers in the run-up to and at the Africa Investment Summit in London in January. And one area which I'm glad to share with you today where we have been able to act on that, which is long overdue, has been around UK export finance. So as you probably know, UK export finance has a high risk appetite for lending in Africa, including in South Africa. But the reality is that it's got very little current exposure. In fact, I think I'm right in saying that the last deal was to support Rolls-Royce engine exports to SAA a few years ago. So the appetite is there on UK EF's part, but it's our experience this only really becomes real, and we only really get demand from customers being driven up when we have a physical presence on the ground. So we have appointed a new UK export finance officer who's going to start in our office, and we're working with Sean in Johannesburg from the 1st of October. His name is Dirk van den Berg, so a good British name there, as you can hear. But he'll be well familiar with the UK, but the South African landscape from the word go. And we hope that what we'll see is what we've seen in Ghana, where we put a UK officer in Accra, and we saw unsurprisingly a strong increase in demand for UKEF products as a result. So we're hoping for a similar outcome from having a physical presence here, which is long overdue. Last word on coronavirus. Obviously, the hit to the South African economy, like the British economy, is something that cannot be underestimated, cannot be overstated. 16.4% GDP contraction in the second quarter. On top of the slowdown which we had already seen in the first quarter, it is estimates of GDP contraction for the year range between 7% and 9% or even higher. So this is a major hit, and it is estimated that at best it will take 3 to 5 years to get back to the GDP of the first quarter, and some calculations say that South Africa has lost 7 years of growth in the first half of this year. So this is really significant, and it puts an extra premium on and provides a new context really for the economic reform plans that President Ramaphosa was already keen to push forward. There has been a couple of significant developments in that respect over the summer. So the taboo of accessing IMF lending has been broken. The IMF's lent South Africa $4.3 billion, and the World Bank is also lending both for health and now also negotiating a new loan, $2 billion loan for infrastructure. So this is a significant change, I believe, and presents some opportunities, as well as vital support for South Africa. What's going to be a really difficult time for the fiscus over the next few years. We've been also looking for ways in which we can support South Africa's emergence and recovery. And I put an article up online yesterday, which tried to highlight in particular a couple of opportunities which I really see for South Africa to attract inward investment, including from the UK. The two I highlighted yesterday were around infrastructure in general and around renewable energy in particular. I think it's really, really important, both as a signal to investors about the overall climate and as a way of generating direct private sector investment and helping South Africa achieve its decarbonisation targets. That the next round of the REAP, the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Programme, is the data set for that, and that is clearly happening. And then on the infrastructure side, the top 50 new projects which have been identified by Dr. Ramaphosa's office in the presidency, that we get those sort of market ready, where investors can see what the offer is, how private sector players can get involved. The third and last point is an obvious one again about the spectrum auction, which we had hoped would take place as previously announced by the end of this year. That has been delayed to March 2021, i.e. next March, and we really, really hope that date will be stuck to, and that the framework for that auction will be announced soon, so that people can see the terms on which participation is being invited. So those are three quick things that would make a big difference to investor sentiment and where South Africa has an opportunity. But let me stop there and hand over to Sean, and look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Nigel, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to you all. It's fantastic to see such a good audience who's come along to hear what we have to say today. So I'll try to keep my remarks reasonably brief to allow as much time as possible for questions and for us to really get into some detailed conversation. But there's a few things that I'd be keen to touch on as a part of my role leading our trade and investment kind of commercial team in the British High Commission in South Africa. So I guess the the first thing to say is that we recognise, as does everyone else, that this is an unprecedented time with unprecedented challenges. A great part of my job is that I spend a lot of time talking to business, but during that, we've been very aware of the challenges that coronavirus and the associated sort of regulatory policy and health implications are having on business. So it's a challenging time, but I remain an optimist, and I remain someone who likes to focus on the upside. And I think both myself and we as the British High Commission remain kind of convinced in our belief that trade and investment and the interactions between business can be a massive support to the type of clean and resilient recovery that we're looking to see, and a return to growth in the not too distant future. And we are looking to expend a huge amount of our time and our resource in support of that effort. And that really does kind of connect with some of the underlying ambitions behind the EU exit project. At its heart and sitting behind all the kind of the sort of the policy to's and fro's is a belief that open and free trade brings benefit to all, and we're really looking to use EU exit as a catalyst to build on our trade and investment relationship with other partners around the world, South Africa not least, and to ensure that we can be as responsible and as flexible and as nimble in our reactions to the needs of UK and South African businesses as they arise. So I really do hope and foresee a kind of a positive trajectory in which we can ensure that we are working in partnership with businesses like yourselves to support that recovery, and doing so in as flexible and responsible way as possible. I thought I'd just speak a little bit to where we're kind of seeing the opportunities arising over the coming months, associated both with the EU exit, but also with the huge response and recovery efforts which are ongoing from both the UK and South African governments in response to coronavirus. So I think we see kind of opportunity and growth in four separate areas. So the first would be in infrastructure and the kind of multiplier industries, those industries which were referenced by President Ramaphosa as the network sectors. So things like transportation, housing, water and sanitation infrastructure projects. We've already seen through the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium that the President hosted about a month or so ago, that there's a huge focus on infrastructure as a catalyst for growth in South Africa. And I think we're likely to see a very similar focus in the United Kingdom. We have a Prime Minister at the moment who is very keen to explore the possibilities of capital injection and infrastructure spending to kickstart growth. And I think we're likely to see a substantial effort in that area, which will present a really interesting opportunity for both UK and South African companies that are looking to deliver goods and services in that space. I think a second area that we're seeing opportunity and interesting development is within the kind of the sort of the social service sector, so health and education. Coronavirus in different ways has presented a huge challenge in both of those sectors, and we've seen really dramatic accelerated changes, probably taking up trajectories which were already existing, but really accelerating those. So I think we'll see a really substantial focus on the value of a universal health system. So in the UK, we have the NHS, and I think we're likely to see additional resource and investment going into that, but potentially looking at how it can be configured to deal with future shocks like the one we've seen recently. And in South Africa, we're closely tracking and working in partnership around the NHI project and its ambitions around a universal health service. But alongside that, we're also seeing really interesting developments on the kind of the digital and delivery and patient and consumer access points, both in healthcare and education, which presents really interesting opportunities for us to explore how the commercial sector and the innovation it can bring can really drive sustained positive increases in how we deliver in these sectors. So I think likely to be a big focus on those. The third area is a kind of a preoccupation with supply chain security. So Nigel briefly touched upon this, but it's something which is extremely important to many of the businesses and government representatives that we engage with. Diversification, assuredness of supply, ability to pivot quickly and swiftly. And I think we've seen a real opportunity for South African exporters in that space. We've had some extremely positive conversations between the association in the UK, which represents our wholesale and our greengrocers, who are really actively looking at diversifying their supply chain and bringing in new suppliers. And it's something that we're going to be working really hard and really closely to accelerate and see that as a key way that a really important export sector of South Africa's economy can grow and expand through its trading relationship with the United Kingdom. And then finally is the kind of the broad brush area of energy. So it would be remiss of me not to mention this with the UK holding the chair of COP26. This is a really key policy focus for us, both in the UK and in our international diplomacy. But I think from a commercial side, we're really keen to explore the role that commercial innovation can have in the kind of the clean growth and climate supportive growth agenda, but also an agenda that supports jobs and livelihoods. And so I think exploring opportunities in renewable energy, in kind of network and transmission, and in the associated kind of built environment elements of clean growth will be a really interesting area to explore, and one that we're really keen to ensure sits hand in hand with a kind of a broader economic recovery agenda. So they are the kind of the big areas that I see in terms of opportunities coming down the line, or at least the things that we're really focusing on in our engagement with UK and South African business. So what are we doing to support that, and how can you interact with us? Well, firstly, I have an open door. I'm always very willing to host conversations, to have a chat, probably virtually at the moment, but hopefully in the near future in person over a coffee or whatever, to discuss your interests, your needs, what you're looking for, and how we can work to support those transactions between the UK and South Africa. But broadly, our areas of focus and our priorities sit across three areas. So the first is on trade policy and the trade environment. So as Nigel mentioned, the UK SACU plus M agreement is a crucial part of that. And in the development of that agreement, we use the original EU SADC EPA as a foundation, with primarily technical changes being made. What that means, and what's really important to take away, is that under the agreement, 99% of South African products exported to the UK will continue to benefit from duty-free, quota-free market access, or from partial liberalisation through reduced tariffs and tariff rate quotas. So it really is an agreement which is designed to allow business to continue to trade without any additional barriers or tariffs. And with that foundation, through the built-in agenda, we really are exploring opportunities to take that further. But as Nigel said, really welcome input from business as to where we should be focusing our attention in that space. But alongside the trade policy angle, we also have a really big focus on the kind of the nuts and bolts of market access going both ways. So we work through our Prosperity Fund and the UK aid partnership with South Africa in support of the kind of the technical implementation of the new trade policy agreement, but also in support of kind of easing of sort of customs regulations and barriers and things like that, and sort of the nuts and bolts of exporting, which we know businesses can often run a cropper with. And we also work with chambers, with both of your chambers, as a government actor who is really keen to help amplify your voice and ensure that it really has the ability to influence government policy and the work that we do to support your agendas. So the trade environment is a very important area that we focus on. The second area is around kind of connectivity. So we're really keen to work harder to bring UK and South African businesses together to explore mutually beneficial commercial transactions. And I think you'll see us as we begin to see an opening up, or hopefully an opening up of the economy and of restrictions around kind of engagement and travel. We're looking to be extremely active in terms of, trade missions and introductions and facilitations to ensure that we really do help UK and South African businesses meet, discuss, and do business together, which ultimately is kind of the end point of my job. I'll be a happy man if I see lots of new transactions happening. And then the third area, and this is one that Nigel's very ably covered, so I'll just briefly mention it, but is the access to finance point. So Dirk joining the team is a really beneficial thing for us, and in essence what that means is that you'll have somebody who knows the financing world inside and out, who is fully over the UK export finance offer and is very willing and able to have meaningful conversations with business about how UK facilitated or UK provided financing can support your trade and investment transactions. So hopefully a really positive development there, and we're really looking forward to seeing that drive a much greater uptake of UK export finances, loaning and cover risk. So they're the three kind of areas that we really focus on and support. And I always welcome comments on how we can do more. And looking forward to the Q&A that will follow. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that, Sean. Nigel, thank you very much for what you covered. I'll sum up a couple of thoughts towards the end, but just a couple of questions to both of you first. You talked in both cases about the reduction in regulation, red tape, barriers to business, and you made reference to a couple of the people and industries and energies. Could you give us a story, one example maybe, that specifically shows us what difference you have really made in taking away these barriers? I don't mind who wants to answer first.
Well, actually, Sharon, thanks for mentioning barriers. I mean, the one thing that is on my mind right now, because I might ask Sean to give an example specifically from the DIT experience, but the one big barrier at the moment to trade and our ability to support South Africa's economic recovery is around travel. So right now we are on tenterhooks waiting to know whether the UK is going to be on the list of countries which South African ministers decide are not still permitted to, from which are not permitted to travel to South Africa from. We understand that is being drawn up now on the basis of WHO guidelines, and obviously we are acutely conscious that is happening against the backdrop of a sudden increase in the infection rate in the UK, which, while it's certainly not as bad as in other countries, is nevertheless concerning enough that our Prime Minister is making an announcement about additional restrictions in the UK later on today. So we don't yet know what the regime is going to be like and what our ability is going to be to support tourism in South Africa through the next season, in particular, cognizant of the fact that we are the biggest source country for tourists that South Africa has. 430,000 people normally come through every year. Obviously, the tourist season is not going to look anything like that this year, but I have been making the point to anyone who will listen that there are a number of segments to that market, and one of them which South Africa could still attract this year, even with quarantine regimes in place, is the major chunk of second homeowners who traditionally spend the winter months in the Cape. And although they are not staying in hotels, they are spending a lot of money. They're going out, they are traveling, and they're putting money into the South African economy. And I think that is not something to be ignored. So I have been, you can please rest assured, if you're in that category, I've been making the case on your behalf, because I think it feels as though general tourism is going to be tough, particularly if South Africa decides to keep in place, even if countries are allowed to come, if a visa regime which requires you to have a visa before you get on a plane is still in place, and if there are requirements around pre-departure testing as well. So look, I think that is a difficult area. We understand these are tough decisions for our government as well. As I've reminded people, our approach has been different. We've never closed the UK border to South Africans, and throughout this crisis, South Africans have been travelling to the UK on repatriation flights and have been able to travel back because South Africa's constitution guarantees you the right to return home if you have a South African passport. So the South Africans have been able to travel in both directions. Brits haven't. We're hoping that will change. But in the meantime, the longer it persists, the longer it will become more of an inhibition to normal business. And I was, last point, I was encouraged to hear the president refer to the possibility that long-term visas would be reinstated for those who had anything other than a permanent residency. Other types of work visas, retirement visas, and that sort of thing would be reinstated, which is great. So people wouldn't need to reply. And that potentially business people would be allowed to come back even if their country was red listed, if they were a particular investor and they needed to return. So there may be some flexibility around the edges, but that's the main thing I'm hanging out for at the moment. But let me hand over to Sean.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, I can give one very quick example, which I think puts a nice bit of colour to the story that Nigel was telling at the beginning about the kind of the macro figures in the citrus trade during coronavirus lockdown. So we actually worked directly with a UK buyer and a South African distributor during the early stages of lockdown, which will have been contributing to those overall figures. We supported them with the DTI to discuss the policy positions around trade and exports. We worked closely with the customs authorities to ensure that trade could go ahead, and we also worked in close collaboration with the UK's Ministry for Agriculture, so DEFRA, to ensure that we could expedite the kind of the licensing and the requirements which were necessary to bring those fruits into the UK. And that was a really nice example of the work that we can do in support of something which is going to benefit both South Africa and the UK. It was a big preoccupation for DEFRA. South Africa was a major target for them to ensure that we maintain supply chain security, and we could bring the kind of the personal element to that by working closely with actual companies in that space. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it always puts it into context for people to hear a example and have the fruits and the vitamin C. I thought was one none of us are going to forget. I'm going to ask one question because it's the thing that's always on the minds of people outside of South Africa, particularly those of us who know South Africa as well, those who trade with South Africa, is this big word around the C word, but not the COVID word, not the cancer word, the corruption word. To what extent does this infiltrate into the normal day-to-day business across South Africa's borders with the UK? And to what extent do businesses need to arm themselves against potential corruption that might be occurring in the supply chain or the product that they might be involved in? Leave it to either of you.
Sharon, let me try that one first. I mean, so when we ask the members of the British Chamber here in Southern Africa what their major concerns are, the C word which comes up more often than corruption is crime, which is a real issue for British investors here, even those who are involved in the security sector, like G4S, who are one of the biggest employers here. That is the C word that I hear more often when it relates, not because corruption is not a significant issue in South Africa. President Ramaphosa has spoken at great length about it in recent months. So nobody is trying to hide the fact that it's an issue, and we obviously take it seriously when we're planning the assistance that we are providing to South Africa, including for example, the recent decision to contribute 50 million rand to the South African Solidarity Fund. One of the reasons that we did that is because that fund has a unique governance structure, which is largely private sector led. It's not a government pot of money, and so we felt there is good governance, good transparency, good accountability built around the way that fund operates, which gave us more confidence. But the corruption issue doesn't tend to be one of the biggest barriers to British companies investing or doing business here. I think other forms of regulatory barriers, practical issues, crime, local local issues tend to be what gets in the way of investment or complicates the lives of existing investors more often. But Sean might like to add to that.
Yeah, I completely echo all of that, Nigel. I think the only thing to add is that South Africa is a strong and independent judicial system. It's got a really strong, domestic advisory sector. I think when we're talking about corruption with UK companies, it's not necessarily something which is going to stop them coming, but it is important for them to do the due diligence and to think through the contracting structures and the work that they want to do beforehand to mitigate and to limit any risk as much as possible. And that's absolutely something that my team works on, but there are also many very well qualified advisory third parties within the South African system who can help with that as well.
I think, Sharon, if I might just add quickly, I mean, the other C word that springs to mind that we get a lot is compliance. So in particular, compliance with the evolving BBBEE code, which is a cost to business. People understand the importance of transformation, and British companies here are committed to it and do it in many different ways. But what we have found is that there is a lack of flexibility in the way that code is interpreted by the people responsible for interpreting it, and that trips up a lot of British companies and other international investors here whose corporate structures make it really difficult to comply in a local setting in South Africa with everything in that code.
Thank you, Nigel. I know a couple of customers that we've worked with, members that we've worked with, have had similar challenges around the last C word that you've made reference to, and particularly in relation to the BBBEE, get there eventually, broad-based black empowerment. But it is very, very challenging. And I think the reason you've brought up the issue of crime, and thank you for doing that, is because that affects people personally, whereas the corruption they can put in systems and controls and activities from outside to protect themselves a bit, but the crime aspect is very difficult from a personal point of view. So you can actually get why that is so front of mind at an emotional level. There have been quite a few questions that have focused around Africa and South Africa, China's footprint in Africa, the UK's desire to be in Africa, China being in everything from citrus to PPE, and what is the role of the UK government in the African continent, and is there a spill-off benefit to South Africa of that UK footprint, and what should South Africa be doing to energize itself into Africa? Is there a market there for them with the new trade agreements that they've got as well? Quite a few questions in there.
Yeah, no, those are really interesting and important questions which are on our minds as well. So one of the other processes which has been going on in the course of this year, despite coronavirus, has been a big inside government review of our international engagement. It's called the Integrated Review. It's run out of number 10 in the Cabinet Office, and it's really looking at all aspects of our international engagement to see where we can make the most impact and derive the most value and make the biggest global contribution in line with all of our objectives. And so as part of that, as you would expect, we have been looking at what we're about in Africa, what our offer is. And I think this is, there's an opportunity to refresh that and reinvigorate it and hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, add extra coherence to our offer and make it, make the UK offer in Africa a compelling one. I know that a lot is written about China and sort of great power competition. I personally find it sometimes a bit overdone. I mean, if you think about foreign direct investment into South Africa, let's say, in practice, it's not really a competition. It's South Africa is competing with its peers in Kenya and Rwanda and Ethiopia increasingly, and Ghana, to attract scarce foreign capital. The more foreign direct investment in South Africa, the better. We like to think that ours comes with quality, with integrity, with real skills transfer, and all of that. But fundamentally, we're not sitting here saying that we need to be decreasing the amount of Chinese investment in Africa. That's not good for for Africa. So I think we are we do look at the continent increasingly as a continent. That's why we reorganized our trade and investment work with Emma Wade-Smith as the commissioner for the whole continent. We are looking at what we can do continentally. We held the Africa Investment Summit deliberately in January as a signal of political intent and interest and determination to raise our profile in Africa. We don't take anything for granted in terms of our position here. As I think in the future, there will only be more interest from the UK side. I think the other point to make is that there is huge interest on our part in the ACFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. At the moment, it is embryonic. It needs, between now and January, February, when South Africa hosts the next AU summit, it needs to be translated into detail. So the detail on tariffs and non-tariff barriers, on rules of origin, and all the things that go to making a trade agreement real rather than something on paper. Those all need to be ironed out, and that's a heck of a task. But nevertheless, we are really excited about the possibility that it offers, the potential that it offers to drive intra-African trade. And look, if you look at the South African economy, the potential for South Africa to grow by exporting goods and services to the rest of the continent is huge. And by the way, other African countries are very cognizant of that and probably a little bit worried about it. But it is, you have a competitive advantage, and the ACFTA, as President Ramaphosa has recognized, is a great route for South Africa to grow its economy through the continent.
Yeah, Sharon, just one final thing to add on that, just in terms of kind of the position of South Africa in relation to the rest of Africa. I mean, it's also a really interesting proposition for UK business. So a lot of UK business headquarter their Africa operations out of South Africa, and it's something that we have a lot of conversations about. And AFCTA would be a further kind of inducement to see that increase. So I think it's a real benefit that South Africa enjoys at the moment, and I think doubling down on that is a really important thing. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. One very quick question, a simple question that came from the floor. Will the deferred FCO merger affect the UK government's commitment to the 0.7% spend on ODA?
So far not. The government's committed to 0.7. It's enshrined in UK law, so it would take an act of Parliament to change that. I think if you look at what the Foreign Secretary has said since the FCDO was created, and you look out for what our Prime Minister is going to be saying in New York at the UN General Assembly, the virtual UN General Assembly later this week, I think you'll find a really strong commitment to development in our foreign policy there. So I think we can reassure on that point.
Thank you very much. The other thing that is very pertinent to South Africans and any of us who are doing business in South Africa, which I do on a regular basis, is things like your power outages and the other utilities failures that are occurring, and the inability for those the government and all those utilities to fund themselves, to fix themselves, to reinvest in themselves. You talked about the infrastructure investment funds that have come into the country, but what else is happening on the ground, either at government or at the utilities level, to provide a safer, securer infrastructure that used to exist that will support business coming in and going out?
Yeah, well, look, this is absolutely crucial. The capacity, the constraints on Eskom's electricity generation capacity is a literal ceiling on growth in South Africa, and even during the slowdown as a result of the coronavirus lockdown, we still had power outages here, which shouldn't have happened, but it is a reflection of the legacy problems which Andre de Ruyter has inherited. Now, I've had a couple of virtual meetings with Andre and been on a number of other interactions with him in the last few months. I find him very impressive. I think he is really determined to drive improvements at Eskom. He has a very strong focus on keeping the lights on, literally on maintenance, which has been the real Achilles heel, or one of the major problems at Eskom in recent years. And he has set out a timetable for achieving an end to what's euphemistically called load shedding here. but which is towards the end of next year. Now that may be a bit optimistic, but what I find even more encouraging, and this is really why we've been engaged with Eskom, and are going to carry on being engaged with them, is that I think he has also understood that the basic model of overwhelming dependence on coal is basically unsustainable. It can't be sustained in line with South Africa's international commitments, but also it's also the demand for coal exports from South Africa is also going to fall off a cliff as countries like India decarbonize their own energy and other industries, and so there is an economic self-interest, a national security self-interest, not to over-dramatize it, in South Africa accelerating its decarbonisation, and that is something that I think Andre de Ruyter is interested in, and lots of international partners, ourselves included, and potential and development finance institutions are also interested in, because South Africa's got a long way to go in decarbonising from its current 80% reliance on coal, but it has very self-evident potential, and it also has a world-leading framework in the form of the REAP for attracting private sector capital, so that it doesn't need public subsidies. The REAP has already proved in rounds 1 to 4 that there is a sea of private money out there wanting to, looking for homes. There's lots of funds with mandates that explicitly tie them to investing in a percentage of renewable energy generation, and the model works. So our message to our partners in South Africa is, you've got a great model. If you want to attract investment quickly, this is the quickest route to do it, and to the extent you can resist tampering with the existing functioning model, we'd encourage you to do that.
Well, you've got enough wind and you've got enough sunshine and you've got limited water. You've got a coastline, but yes, you've got those to work with. Sean, do you want to just add to that before I ask my last question?
Not a huge amount to add to that, I think, other than just to say that the kind of the green financing space is a space that we're really interested in. We've seen a green bond listed on the London Stock Exchange. We've seen interest from the JSE. You've got CDC, the UK's Development Finance Institute, active in South Africa in the renewable energy space. So it's something which we think is a really interesting proposition. And as Nigel said, it's not for lack of funding that's out there. It's really looking for a home, and a home which gives you the confidence that it's going to deliver against those sort of climate objectives that we'd like to see in there. So I think it's something that we're very keen to support as it progresses. Thanks.
I think as a private investor, not being in renewable energies would be the question, rather than which renewable energies you should be investing in. Just a slightly simpler question. There are some other bigger questions which we're not going to have time to get to, but some of those we will pick up with for all the audience that have not had their questions answered. We will specifically provide the information asked for, because there's some very specific questions which I don't think are applicable to the open forum. So we will handle those directly for everybody. But the question is, not everybody is a big company, not everyone's a medium-sized company. They're not all into infrastructure. There's an SME market both in the UK, and there's an SME market here in the UK, there in South Africa, depending on who I'm talking to. How can you advise them to get support to be able to mobilize their activities in exporting to the respective other countries or importing from? Now, obviously, the chambers are a direct route to providing some of that solution, but outside of the two chambers, what advice would you give?
Well, let me ask Sean to answer that one, because this is exactly what DIT Overseas Trade Services does. The bigger companies tend not to need our help so much because they're well resourced and they know their markets already. And so the space of SMEs is exactly where we tend to focus. So over to Sean.
Yeah, 100%. So this is hugely important for us, Sharon. So if you look at our kind of setup in the UK, as well as our kind of sector focused teams who deal with the biggest companies, we've got a whole regional network of trade advisors who are spread across the UK regions and the devolved assemblies, whose sole mandate is to support SMEs in their export journey. And we recognise that actually the support that you provide there is slightly different to the type of support that you provide for a big multinational multinational. It's very much focused on the kind of, first and foremost, is this the right decision? Does this fit with your business model? What sort of a market should you be looking at? And then hand-holding through those first steps of an export journey. And my team here in South Africa is the other end of that. So we're very keen to look at how we can support SMEs who are kind of just starting an export journey, and help them to land in South Africa in an effective and as safe a manner as possible. And I think that comes to the point that we made earlier about kind of compliance and corruption. Actually, some of those nuts and bolts advice that we can provide about sort of how you practically can do business in South Africa, what forms you need to fill in, etc., is really valuable for SMEs, I think. So both at the UK end and here with my team, we have that. I think the other point, just to quickly say, is that there are other institutions, obviously on the South African side, that do that with South African companies, who we have really good relationships with, and we can help link into the UK market as well. So we work closely with the investment promotion agencies, who often also have an export interest, and some of the other trade associations, and it's an area that we're always keen to explore more of, but it's a really important point around that SME support. Thanks.
It's been interesting hearing from both of you the restructuring that the UK government has gone through to address the greater focus on Africa and the greater need for trade and the outcome of making Brexit successful for all of you. So there have been a lot of questions around that, which I think we'll take offline, and we will respond more directly to them because you have covered them to a degree in some detail. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to the president of the British Chamber for Business in South Africa, and I'm going to promote you, Leon. I hope you are popping up in the right place, because there are two of you. There we go. Hopefully we've got Leon. Leon, if you could just give us some short closing words, and before I close the conference in a few minutes.
Thank you, Sharon. Good morning, everybody. And thanks to Sharon, to Nigel, and to Sean. We're on the ground here in Johannesburg as the British Chamber of Business, and work very closely with our sister chamber in the UK. And again, a great session. I suppose key observations from my side, we're seeing a lot of appetite for bilateral trade movements, even obviously given the post-Brexit context, but equally just given our cultural synergies, our timelines, that presents a real opportunity. And what we're seeing is great talent from South Africa wanting to access the UK market, which with Sean's team and introduction to Sharon, we can help. And equally, people coming the other way from London wanting to access what is going to be the biggest consumer market in the world in the next 12 years. Africa itself is going to have a workforce of 1 billion people under the age of 35, which you can see as an opportunity or you can see as a challenge. And we're finding businesses are seeing that as an opportunity. We work very closely. With Sean's team, we can help you land here in South Africa and help you grow. And if you're looking to go the other way, we can do the same thing too. Just picking up on the C's that we discussed. I suppose policy certainty, that's the C I'm holding on to, is something that is a barrier. So we touched on BBBE, but also land rights, that's something. And here with BUSA, led by Sipho Pitiana, we're very involved in being the voice of business, challenging the government to make sure, and challenging them respectfully in partnership to say, let's make this a more business-friendly landscape so we can thrive. The other challenge that we're often faced with is visas. So getting your people into the country, having a work visa, then bringing your spouses with you, enabling them to work and have your kids go to school is often a challenge. But again, a great debate. We're here part of the extended family and the team on the ground in Joburg and Cape Town. So feel free to reach out and connect with us either through Sharon or through Sean's team. And thank you to Sharon for putting on a great event this morning. And thank you to Nigel and Sean for always being there to support us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leon. A nice close to it with some additional C's. I didn't know there was quite so many of them. But what I've appreciated from both Sean and Nigel are a couple of points that I picked up on is the tactical actions that the UK government are taking to face some of the challenges and opportunities that Africa and South Africa are giving. You've talked about the vision. Obviously, these are words to all of us at this point in time, and what we're looking forward to are the actions that are going to follow with the new teams of people that you've put in place, which I think has been rewarding for all of us to hear and understand, and the focus that you are putting onto this country in terms of the opportunities for South Africa and therefore for South Africa into Africa. And the agreements and the work that has gone into making sure that the existing agreements have held and that the future agreements are going to make some major changes. So I see business for both our countries having massive opportunities here. And as the two chambers, we're there to support them. Doesn't matter how big they are, how small they are, with a single question, with a whole series of needs that they might have. So I did on the Q&A session, I did put my email address up, which is sconstanson@sachamber.co.uk. Please propose any questions that you've not had answered, that are not on the Q&A system that you'd like, and we'll put them to Nigel and to Sean. And I'd like to say thank you very much. We are a minute or two over time. It's been a fantastic session. Gentlemen, you've been very insightful and we've enjoyed it extremely. And thanks to our audience for their attendance from all over the world. And good day to both of you. And Leon, thanks very much for your closing words. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Cheerio.
Thank you, Sharon, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks, Sean.